In this demonstration, our objective is to develop a workflow agent that helps users such as inventory managers and warehouse managers efficiently create stock transfers between inventory organizations. The Check On Hand and Create Transfers workflow agent enables users to rapidly generate inter-organization transfers within Oracle Fusion Inventory Management. The agent ensures that the transfer transactions created are compliant with company policies regarding stock levels and also informs the users if there are any data validation errors. To create this agent from scratch, we will use some building blocks which we'll go through on this slide to configure nodes for the agent. Business object function nodes are used to read and update application data. Condition nodes are used to route the workflow based on business rules. Set variables nodes store intermediate values, flags, or user context to be used by later nodes. Send email nodes automatically trigger emails to the right recipients based on workflow actions. After finishing agent build, we will test the agent in debug mode. To begin, let's go to AI Agent Studio, which is where developers and administrators create and manage these workflow agents. After logging in with your student ID, navigate to the Tools springboard. Then click on the AI Agent Studio tile. Go to the Agent Teams tab and click Add on the top left corner to create a new workflow agent. Enter the agent name and see the agent code get defaulted based on the entered name. Throughout the execution of this demonstration and also the activity guide, wherever you see a suffix of YY, underscore YY, XX or underscore XX, you have to replace it with the suffix of your student ID. Select the other basic agent team details such as the family, the product, the type, which in this case will be workflow, and enter the description of what this agent does. Then toggle to the Variables tab. Variables are values that may change across different executions of this workflow agent, and hence there is a need to record these values for reference during a workflow execution. Proceed to add the variables as provided in the activity guide. After adding all the listed variables, toggle to the Triggers tab. Triggers represent the values or information that will be available when this workflow gets triggered either by a user or an external system. Add the triggers from the activity guide. After adding all the triggers, click on Create on the bottom right corner of the drawer. Copy the workflow agent name that got created and click Save and Close to save the progress made till here. In the Agent Teams tab in the draft context, search for the same agent that was just created. Open it in Edit mode. Click on the plus icon that appears when hovering over the line connecting the start and stop icons in the Agent Designer view. Here, we can see the menu or list of all the different components that can be added to this workflow. We will start by setting the variables. Enter the variable details as provided in the activity guide. We will then add the particular variables that we want to define at this stage of the workflow. Add all the variable details one by one as provided in the activity guide. For this demonstration and as part of this activity, we will not derive the email ID dynamically, but we'll hardcode the email ID. Here, you can use your own email ID if you want to check how the emails are flowing. After adding all the variables, click Create on the Set Variables drawer. Next, we'll add the business object function that will leverage these variables that have already been defined to do an API call. Click on the plus icon on the connector line again, and this time select Business Object Function. Enter the basic business object details as provided in the activity guide. Here, we are using the inventory organization lookup business object to obtain the organization ID based on the organization code which is provided in the trigger. Edit the parameter for P organization code and use the insert expression option to map the right variable to this parameter. Apply the parameter and scroll down to the output section and switch to the simple mode. Add an output property with name as organization ID and type as string. The data type of string will allow us to accept both numeric as well as alphabetic values for this particular property. Apply the property details and click on Create in the Business Object Function drawer. Next, using this business object, we will derive the from organization ID based on the from organization code that is provided as part of the trigger. We now need to store this retrieved organization ID for future use. Hence, we'll add a set variables node. Enter the name as provided in the activity guide and watch the code get defaulted according to the name. Proceed to add the variable which is also provided as part of the activity guide. Select the variable as from inventory org ID and in value, use the insert expression option to go to context, nodes, the inventory organization lookup node, which was the previous one which we created, and from its output, select organization ID. To allow the workflow agent to accurately read the response provided by the API call that is done by the previous business object function, add the string item bracket 0 in square brackets just before the response payload tag that will be produced as an output by the business object inventory organizations lookup. Apply the variable and click on Create. Now that we have retrieved and stored the transfer from inventory organization ID, we need to next find and store the transfer to inventory organization ID. Hence, add another business object function. Enter the object details once again, which is provided in the activity guide. And here we'll use the same business object function as we did in the previous business object that we created. This is because we are using both the business object functions to retrieve the exact same master data, which is the data of inventory organizations. Once again, edit the parameters and use the insert expression option to map the right to inventory org code variable to the input of this particular API call. This to inventory org code was provided as part of the trigger that was received by this workflow agent. And then this trigger value was stored as a variable which we are now utilizing to do this API call with the help of this particular business object. Apply the parameter details and switch to output simple mode. Next, add a property which will be used to define the transfer to inventory organization ID that is retrieved as part of the response payload from the API call that is done by this particular business object function. Add the name as provided in the activity guide and update the type to string. Apply the property and click Create. Now, we'll proceed to set the variable for the transfer to inventory organization ID. Add the variable and insert the expression using context, nodes, and select the inventory organization lookup one business object function that was created to specifically retrieve the transfer to inventory organization ID. From the output, select the payload data that is generated by this business object. Once again, add the items 0 string to enable this workflow agent to properly read and record the array data that is provided as output of the previous API call. Apply the variable and click on create. Now it's time to create the next business object function for the next API call that we need to do. Update the business object details provided in the activity guide. Now that we have retrieved both the transfer from and transfer to organization IDs, next we need to retrieve the item ID based on the item number that has been provided as part of the trigger. We will first update the input parameters for this business object function. Insert an expression from the context, variables, and the from inventory org ID that has already been retrieved and recorded upstream in the same workflow. We are specifically using the from inventory org ID variable because we want to retrieve the item ID from the source inventory organization for this transaction. Apply the updated parameter and proceed to update the item number parameter as well. Add the P item number also from the variable. Unlike the P organization ID parameter, which we retrieved with the help of an API call done with another business object function, the item number attribute was readily available to us as part of the trigger and it got recorded as a variable directly from the trigger. Apply this as well. Once again, scroll down to the output section and switch to simple mode. We will add a property to again define the output information that we need from this particular business object to serve our purpose in the downstream workflow. The reason why we are doing this API call with this business object is so that we can retrieve the item ID which is needed for the next API call. Hence, we'll create a property called item ID and we'll make it as type string. Apply the updated property and create the business object. Now that we have retrieved the item ID from this business object function, it is time to store it for future use. So we'll add another set variables node. Add the name and watch the code get defaulted based on the added name. Add a variable. Since we are recording item ID from the previous business object function, we'll also select the variable of item ID that was already created at the beginning but not yet recorded. This is the stage when we are going to assign an actual value to this item ID variable. Insert an expression from the context using the previous node, which is item lookup. Once again, from the output of this node, we will map the item ID property to the item ID variable. Add the item 0 string to enable this workflow to read and record the API response and apply the variable. Create the set variable node. Now, we need to do another API call to get the Onhand in the from inventory organization, and hence we are going to add another business object function node. Once again, add the basic business object details that is provided in the activity guide. Here also, we are using a pre-built business object just like every other business object in this workflow. The business object function is also pre-built. In order for this business object to make this API call, it needs two input parameters, which is the organization ID and the item ID. In the organization ID, we'll use the insert expression option to map the variable of from inventory org ID, which has already been recorded upstream. Next, we'll proceed with the P item ID mapping. This too will get mapped from the variables which has already been stored. Scroll down to the output section and once again switch to simple mode. From this API call from the response payload, we need to record the value for available to transact quantity. Add the name of the response payload tag and update the value type, which in this case will be number since this is a quantity. Apply the property and create this business object function. Next, based on the response received by the get item on hand business object function, we need to set the variable for the item on hand. Add a set variable node and enter the details as provided in the activity guide. We are using the available to transact quantity tag provided in the response payload of the previous API call to store the item on hand value in our variables. Apply the variable mapping and create the set variable load. Now, we'll add an if condition load to decide whether the current available item on hand or available to transact quantity that we retrieved and stored in the previous two steps are enough to allow this workflow agent to directly go ahead and create a transfer. Enter the details as mentioned in the activity guide, and once again use the insert expression feature to add an if condition. We are using the stored variable of item on hand, which is nothing but the available to transact quantity of the transfer item in the transfer from inventory organization. Add the less than 50 expression as shown on the screen. Create the if condition. Now the workflow branches out based on the outcome of this if condition. First, we'll configure the true branch. Here, we'll add a send email node, which will notify the user that the on-hand quantity or the available to transact quantity in the source inventory organization is less than 50, and hence, as per policy, this workflow agent is not going to create a transfer even if there is sufficient on-hand, and the user must reach out to the facility manager in order to get the transfer created. Define the recipient from the email ID variable. Add CC recipients if required, and hardcode the email subject. In the email template, we'll define the email body, which will have two lines. First, we'll define what goes into line 1, which will come directly from the trigger. Then we'll hardcode the static text that will go around this variable in the trigger. Next, we'll proceed with adding line 2. We'll map line 2 from the variable and not from the trigger. Once again, add the text, the static text that will go around this dynamic variable. Here, you can see we are sending an email message to the user saying the transfer shipment, whatever shipment number was provided as part of the REST trigger, was not created because the on-hand for the item, whatever item was stored by the variable item number, is less than 50. So please contact the facility manager to create the transfer. Create the send email node. Next, we'll go to the false branch where we'll decide how the workflow is going to behave if the condition of item quantity being less than 50 is false, which means that the available item quantity is more than 50. In this case, we need to do an API call to create the transfer, and hence we are going to add a business object function node. Add the details as provided in the activity guide. We'll go for the function create in-transit inter-organization transfer. Unlike the previous API calls or business object functions, this one creates a new data point or data record in the system and hence has a longer list of parameters that we need to define. Go ahead and define each of the parameters as provided in the activity guide. Unlike the first three parameters, which we mapped to an already stored variable, we are going to leave prev blank and we're going to hardcode PUOM as EA. Hence, this particular workflow agent will only work for items that have unit of measure as each. We are going to map the transaction date from the system data. We are going to add a static string to the dynamic current date value as shown on the screen. We are doing this to ensure that the current date data, which is provided real time by the AI Agent Studio, matches the date format that is expected by the API call and is used in the backend tables as well. Apply the transaction date parameter. The P subinventory code parameter will also be hard-coded as stores. Again, this means that this workflow agent can only transfer stock into the store's sub-inventory of the destination inventory organization. If required while solutioning, the parameters that we have hard-coded can also be derived dynamically through additional API calls. The to_org ID will be a dynamic variable and will not be hard-coded. plot and serial payload will also be hard-coded to null. This again means that this workflow agent can only work for items that do not have lot and serial control. However, as I already stated, the design can be updated as per your solution requirements. We'll update the P quantity, which is fetched dynamically. It is nothing but the transfer quantity or the requested quantity that the user or the REST trigger wants to move from one inventory organization to the other. From this final API call also, we want to record certain output payload tags as properties. These properties will be very useful for our send email nodes, which we will configure right after this. Add the property names and types as provided in the activity guide. After all the properties, parameters, and business object function attributes have been updated, click on Create. After this business object call, we need to add yet another if condition node. We will use this node to decide whether we want to send a success email or a failure email based on the outcome of the previous API call. Define the if condition using the insert expression, which is part of the output properties that we defined in the previous business object function, which is create interop transfer. We are going to use the error code tag, which is part of the response payload of the API call. Insert the string null with 3 equal to signs to denote that this if condition will be satisfied if the error code tag is passed with null value in the response payload. Create the if condition. We'll first configure the true path by adding a send email node. This is the success path. Once again, define the recipient email ID from the value that is hard-coded into the variables. Add the email subject, which will also be static and hard-coded, and proceed with adding the lines in the email template. If the transfer shipment creation is successful, the response payload of the create interop transfer business object function will provide us with a shipment number, which we are going to map to this email template. We are also going to hard-code the string shipment number : before the dynamic value to let the user know that the value that comes after is a shipment number. Next, add line 2. Here, we'll map the transaction type name, which is also provided as part of the response. This hard-coded tag lets the user know that this is the transaction type. When there's a success, we are letting the user know that the transfer was successfully created and providing them with the shipment number and transaction type that has been returned by the response payload of the API call that created the transfer shipment. Click Create. With the true branch configured, let's focus on the email that needs to be sent in the false branch, which is the failure case. Configure the send email node for the failure scenario with the details that are provided in the activity guide. In the error or the failure case, the response payload does not provide us with a shipment number, hence we have to provide the transfer number from the REST input trigger, which was provided by the user or the external system. However, the error code and the error explanation will be provided by the API response if the data is passed into the application staging tables successfully but is not able to move to the base table because of a data validation error. Click Create on the Send Email drawer. The agent build has now been completed, and in the designer view, it should look something like what you see on the screen. Save and close the completed agent. Open it again in edit mode. Click on the play icon to run it in debug mode. Select the trigger type as REST and input the trigger as per the information and instructions provided in the activity guide. Click on Start Test. Here in the debug mode trace, we can see that this workflow ends with an email Onhand less than 50. This email says that the transfer shipment was not created as the Onhand for the item used in this workflow run was less than 50, please contact facility manager. The email has been sent to test@oracle.com as was configured or hard-coded into the variables node. Scrolling up, let's see how this agent actually worked. At the beginning, we have the first set of variables that are getting recorded and stored as per the trigger details provided and as per the hard coding. Next, the from inventory org code of 001, which was stored as a variable, is being used as an input payload for the inventory organization lookup business object function. Here in the output, the organization ID for the 001 org code is provided, which ends with 4444. Scrolling down, this retrieved organization ID now gets stored as a variable from in org ID. The same process is then repeated from the transfer to inventory organization, where the org code 002 is used to retrieve the org ID, which ends with 4447, and the same to inventory org ID is again stored as a variable. The workflow continues as per the defined nodes, where the previously retrieved from or transfer from inventory organization ID and the item number which was provided in the trigger is used to get an output, which includes the item ID which we need. Then this item ID ending with 7383 gets stored as a variable in the next set variable node. Now that we have both the item ID and the transfer from inventory organization ID, they are used as the input parameter for the next business object to get the item on hand in that particular inventory organization. The output payload has a tag available to transact quantity, which is 25. This value of 25 quantity gets stored as a variable item on hand in the next node. The next item quantity if condition node checks if the item on hand is less than 50 or not. Since this is 25, it is less than 50 and the condition is true. It branches out to the true scenario workflow, which triggers an email saying that on hand is less than 50 for the shipment number provided in the REST input and the item number that has been stored as part of the variables. If you have set up your own email address hard-coded in the email ID variable, you will receive this email. Emails sent from AI Agent Studio may be delayed or blocked based on your email server. The context buttons on each of these nodes can be used to get more details on the information that is being sent as input, taken as output, and the variables that are being stored. Here we can see the list of all the variables that are used by this agent workflow. They all got recorded and stored at different stages of this workflow. Close the chat drawer. Having tested one negative scenario, let's test another negative scenario. With the trigger type selected as REST, add the second sample payload as per the instructions provided in the activity guide. Here we have changed the to inventory org code from 002 to 310. In this instance where we are testing, there is no inter-organization parameters that are existing between 001 and 310, and hence the expectation is for this trigger to fail as well. Start the test. Scroll to the top of the trace where we can see this run has also followed the same path as the previous one. The only difference being the available to transact quantity for this particular item in the source inventory organization is 122, which is more than 50. Hence, this condition, which was true in the last test run, is now false and it has gone to the other branch where it has attempted to create an inter-organization transfer. Here we can see the input payload that has been passed to create the inter-organization transfer, and we can see the response payload provided by the API. In the response payload, we can see that there is an error that has been thrown by the system. The error code says inv_int org exp, and the error explanation says that you must select a valid organization. This is as per the expectation, because as we said before, there are no inter-organization parameters that are set up between org code 310 and org code 001. Based on this error, the if condition node has been evaluated and it has come out as false because, if you remember, the condition was that the error code has to be null. In this case, it is not null, and hence the condition has been evaluated as false, sending the workflow into the failure mail node. Here we can see an email with the subject error transfer not created and the body providing the transfer number from the REST input shipment number and providing the error code from the same response payload of the previous node which attempted to create the interop transfer that we just saw. The error explanation is also taken from the same source. With both the negative scenarios tested, let's test a positive scenario. Close the chat drawer and open the debug mode again, switching to trigger type of REST. Paste the positive scenario payload as per the instructions provided in the activity guide and click on Start Test. Here, once again, we can see that all the nodes got triggered exactly like the previous two runs, and it is at the very last if condition node where there's a difference in this particular run. Here in the response payload, we can see that the shipment number has been created, and this time both the error code and the error explanations are null. Since the error code is null, the if condition has gone into the true branch, triggering the success email with the details received in the API response. The subject says inter-org transfer successfully created, while the body provides the shipment number as well as the transaction type, both of which are derived from the API response of the previous business object function. Having checked this positive scenario, now let's go into inventory management to see if the transfer shipment was actually created or not. From the Actions menu, select Inbound Shipments. In the Inbound Shipments page, select the inventory organization as Atlanta, which is basically the same as inventory org code 002, which is the transfer to or destination inventory organization in this transaction. Here we can see the same shipment number that we provided in the REST trigger payload has been created. The source organization is 001 as we wanted. Click on the shipment hyperlink to review the details. Scrolling down to the line section, we can see that it has been created for the same item that we provided in the payload. That brings us to the end of this demonstration to configure and test the check on hand and create transfer workflow agent.